Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. I'm audible. I'm visible. Good evening to all of you. Yes, sir. Very good. Good evening. Good evening. We'll wait for 2-3 minutes and then we'll begin. Okay. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. We'll start in the next 2 to 3 minutes. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Yes, it's been a long time. Good to see you all again. Good evening to all of you. Srishti, refresh. If you can't see me, if you can hear me, if you can hear me and not see me, just refresh once. Aarti, same thing. Refresh. The problem is if you can hear me and not see me, then you can at least hear me. If you can see me but not hear me, then there's a problem because then you don't know how to get out of it. Refresh if you have an issue. So it's better to not see me than to hear me. Nice to see you all again. Good evening. It's been a while. I've met a lot of you. We've finished the cycle of ancient medieval art and culture and these other issues. Good evening. I'm good. I hope all of you are also perfectly fine. If you're in Delhi, if you're in Uttarakhand, if you're in Himachal, Haryana, Punjab, Chandigarh, I hope you are safe. Extremely dangerous situations in these areas. Yes, Haryana, Uttarakhand. I hope Kulu Manali, Mandi, quite a lot of flash floods. Ironically, we also have to do one of the topics related to water management becomes extremely important in that sense. Welcome, Ekta. No issues. You will then see me sure for very soon with ancient medieval. New batch I have not taught. The newest batch, ancient medieval art and culture, will start, I think, in next month, August. You would have seen me in modern. Ancient medieval has to start. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. We'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll begin. As you know, today is Thursday, so we have two types of webinars. One is called a Tuesday webinar, and the other one is called a Thursday webinar. And Tuesday webinars are weekly current affairs. They're more oriented towards prelims. Today's webinar is more mains oriented. And that is why it says GS paper 1 and 2, which would end geography, polity, and international relations. And we also cover two topics, one out of Yojana and the other one out of Kurukshetra. These are two very important, what we call as magazines, which we cover two very simple but Kurukshetra. We cover these two via two basic topics. So the agenda for today is basically these six topics which we are going to cover. First is we'll discuss Russia, what happened there with regards to the Wagner Group and PMC Wagner, extremely important and critical for Indian uh, foreign policy and generally for the world itself. Thereafter, we'll talk about the Finance Commission. The 16th Finance Commission is going to be constituted very soon. There are certain challenges ahead of it, important. This would be GS paper 2. This will also be GS paper 2. Thereafter, we'll discuss a tussle between a PSU and the Competition Commission of India. Again, GS paper 2. Thereafter, interesting case of exceptionalism to exceptionalism, with regards to how America is handling us. This is again interesting, GS paper 2. This is the topic which is coming out of your Kurukshetra, because the Kurukshetra was specifically on water management and water commitments. We'll talk about that. This would encompass GS paper 2 and 3 both. And last but not the least, for GS paper 1, because this time Yojana was about Gandhian thought. This was the only relevant topic which we would cover. So this time you can actually forget about Yojana, just do this with me, and that is more than enough for you. So these 6 topics is what we have to cover. With every topic as we end, we will also do the questions related to mains questions. Pulkit, the emphasis will change this time. There's a different, totally different emphasis concept itself, because there is a time constraint there. Here we will go for a larger and more comprehensive understanding in that regard. So, need to read Yojana? No, Lakshmi. As you know, every Thursday webinar covers certain Yojana and Kurukshetra topics. You don't have to read Yojana and Kurukshetra. We are doing that for you, so don't have to worry with regards to that. Okay. So, these are the 6 topics we cover. Give me just 1 second. 1 second. Yes. Okay. Now, so we'll start our discussion for today. Is it right to attend webinar? Yes. See, webinars on Tuesday and Thursday happen at the same point of time. They have different emphasis. These are mains based. Tuesdays are prelims based. That's why 8, 9 topics. Here we do very concentrated 6 topics in that regard. Okay. Now let's start our discussion for today with Russia, Ukraine, and the concept of the Wagner Group, or the PMC Wagner. Now, we know that Russia is a very important partner of India. It's an all-weather friend. Unlike the US, which has been very finicky, we'll discuss the US also in this class. This has a very important bearing on what is happening with India vis-a-vis Russia, and what is happening in Russia itself. So just to give you a basic understanding of what is, and this is the way I'm going to teach you also. First, I'll give you the basic understanding. Then we will go into the concept of nitty-gritty, which is through the PPT itself. And thereafter, we will move into the first revision when I'll give you the summary. So in the same session, you learn something and revise twice with me, and then we'll practice a mains question. So that between this 8:30 to 10:30, you don't have to then thereafter go and refer to anything else. The standard protocol. First, you understand it with me. Thereafter, we will revise to the PPT, and then I'll give you a summary in between, so as to give you a recap of everything we've done till this point. The standard structure is going to be there. So what I'm going to have with you now is the basic concept, because see, over a period of time, you tend to forget things. So it's important that you internalize the concept itself. So very simply, you need to understand what is the concept here. So now I'm going to Russia, and we'll move first in 2014, and then we'll move forward. So in 2014, we know that in a very dramatic fashion, Russia took what is called the Crimean Peninsula. Crimean Peninsula generally important because it has a very important port called Sevastopol, which gives access to Russia via the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. The only all-weather port which Russia used to have, but after the disintegration of the USSR, it went to Ukraine. So Ukraine has always been a problematic part of Russian history, because Russia needed Ukraine because of its resources and generally access to the sea. However, once the USSR disintegrated, thereafter Russia became the erstwhile what we call Russian Empire to Russia, and Ukraine came out as a separate country altogether. Since then, Ukraine has been technically arguing that we should be given access to either NATO, or we should be given access to the EU. NATO, as you know, North American Atlantic Organization, or North Atlantic Organization. The NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a very important body because it represented the first response of the West to Russia's nuclear test in 1949. Now, when we talk about NATO, NATO has always been a little bit what we call as indifferent to Ukraine. And in 2014, Russia took matters into its own hands, and it said that if you don't want to add Ukraine to NATO or to the EU, then straightforward, we can take Ukraine or we can take what matters to us. And the first action which happened was the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. Crimean Peninsula. Now, a very important body which emerged during this period, which helped Putin take the Crimean Peninsula, is called the PMC Wagner. And herein comes the concept. What is PMC Wagner? PMC Wagner is basically like a contractor. It's private military company Wagner. Wagner is the name. Basically, they recruit what are called mercenary soldiers. Mercenary soldiers concept is not very new. It has been there since time immemorial, from Greece to Rome, in India, throughout the medieval period, throughout the modern period. We have had what are called mercenary soldiers, soldiers who have no allegiance, they work for money. So PMC Wagner emerged in 2014 as a very important way of taking the Crimean Peninsula. It is basically a private army, and a private army which recruits people who want to work not for a nation but for a company for money. So they are contractors who hire and fire different soldiers, and they basically organize themselves with regards to a private interest, and they take war as a form of employment. And therefore, PMC Wagner emerged out of a very important personality, which we'll talk about, who was very close to Putin, was actually in the USSR jail during the last period under Gorbachev. He was in jail. He came out, actually started a small restaurant in St. Petersburg where even Putin used to eat. He is called the chef because of that. And thereafter, he went into bringing up this new body, which is called PMC Wagner. Now, PMC Wagner is basically a private army, mercenary soldiers taken together, and they work for Putin. They get money from the Russian government, and thereafter they pay their soldiers a very handsome salary. Obviously, they have to fight for Russia on behalf of the PMC Wagner group itself. So basically, think of it like a private company which recruits, and think of Urban Clap, but Urban Clap sends you different types of saloon based personnel. This is a Urban Clap for war. Basically, they provide you what we call as soldiers. So, annexation of Crimean Peninsula, PMC Wagner played a very important role, a very, very important role. And thereafter, it emerged as a very important body in the hand of Putin. But remember, it is a private body. It basically does not come under the Russian army or the Russian government directly. So, between 2014 and 2022, or we can take it as 2021, PMC Wagner started to become extremely popular in Africa, where there was a lot of conflict itself, and dictators started to recruit PMC Wagner, and it became a very important form of private armies which could be developed. And from Syria to Libya to Sudan, everywhere, the PMC Wagner group became very popular as a private army group which could be given a lot of money to fight for. And because they had a lot of what we call as new equipment, the old armies of the Africans were supplemented by the PMC Wagner. Now, when we talk about the PMC Wagner group became very, very big, starting with only 5,000 soldiers at one point of time. And when in the 2021-2022 period, Ukraine war start, or the Ukraine crisis started, 50,000 soldiers were actually recruited by PMC Wagner and sent to the Ukrainian front itself. So it's a very major what we call as contingent within the Russian army which has been fighting in Ukraine. Now, initially, the Ukraine crisis went well. So, before I go into the second phase of this discussion, very simply, the origin of PMC Wagner goes back to the Crimean Peninsula annexation, became extremely important in the Russian army itself. Thereafter, has been employed throughout Africa for certain purposes itself. But in Ukrainian war or the Ukrainian crisis itself, there has been a lot of emphasis on PMC Wagner, considered a very important subsidiary of the army itself, and close to 50,000 soldiers have been pushed via the PMC Wagner group And now there's a major fallout between PMC Wagner and Putin. So the very simple point is, when the Ukrainian war started, PMC Wagner got a lot of emphasis vis-a-vis how Putin wanted to enter into the Ukrainian sector and wanted them to operate as a private army. Till this point, everybody is understanding what I'm trying to say. What is PMC Wagner? It's a private mercenary group. It is basically recruiting soldiers, hire and fire, and it is a private army. Very good. Now, once the Ukraine war started, PMC Wagner played a very important role. And initially, there was quite a lot of success. The Russians were able to enter at least 5 to 6 major districts and regions of Ukraine. But since then, NATO has played a very important role in empowering and in giving the Ukrainians the equipment to fight with the Russians. So, from anti tank missiles to Javelin to even now, very simply, anti aircraft missiles. Now, there's a very simple concept that they're giving tanks from the from the German to the American tanks, all have been provided to the Ukrainians. And now it's reached the point that they want F-16s and F-18. That's a separate issue altogether. But NATO has empowered Ukraine quite a lot, and Ukraine has been able to push back on the Russians in a lot of different sectors. And Russia did not expect this type of resistance. And basically, it's the new Cold War, as we call it, or Cold War 2.0, wherein Russia is fighting a losing battle as of right now vis-a-vis NATO and Ukraine. And Ukraine has now become the new space of testing technology, testing drone technology, and pushing all the different military arms, or all the supply has been pushed towards Ukraine itself. India has shown a lot of resolve in not fully condemning Russia, because Russia has been a very important friend for us, and we have abstained from voting in a lot of different platforms. We've been criticized, but we have our own understanding, and we have actually doubled the Ukraine, what we call as Russian oil and Russian natural gas, which is coming from the Russian refineries. And as of right now, there's a lot of politics going on around. Now, very simply, NATO has empowered Ukraine. And this in turn meant there were multiple retreats. And with multiple retreats, the biggest number of casualties, or the largest number of casualties, have been in the PMC Wagner only. And PMC Wagner, which used to profiteer from war itself, has seen a lot of casualties as of recently. And it is in this context that PMC Wagner group rebelled. This is called a mutiny, when the army rebels, but basically it's a rebellion, it's a mutiny, in which PMC Wagner now started what is called the March of Justice, in which they said that we will now move towards Moscow and we will capture power. This was extremely dramatic, because with 40,000 soldiers moving towards Russia and into the Moscow sector, it had become extremely critical for Putin to manage this well. And this gives us a reminiscence. And if you've done very simply world history with me, or you've done world history, you would remember this is called a civil war situation, in which PMC Wagner now wanted to fight Putin. And it was resolved just 24 hours away from the Wagner group reaching Moscow. And now Putin has given them three options. We'll talk about that. But he has been able to, in a way, quench the problems and the crisis as of right now. Now, the very simple question which should come to your mind is, what are the reasons? Why did PMC Wagner mutiny against the Russian government itself? And why were they going for this march of justice? It becomes extremely simple to understand that. First is corruption. We already know that Russia army itself is not very efficient as of right now. Russia, if you've ever seen their basic track record when it comes to the battles, Crimean War, or be it the Great Eastern Crisis, be it the First World War itself, be it the different wars related to Russo-Japanese War, Russians have always been very, very out towards saying that we are very powerful, but they aren't. And Russian weaknesses have been now used by the Wagner group as form of a mutiny itself. You're asking me a difference between mutiny and rebellion. They're different. Mutiny is when the army tries rebels. Coup is when the army tries to capture power. Rebellion is when you fight to get concessions. Revolt is when you try to overthrow something. So that is, these are four different words, have different connotations. You can't call it a mutiny because it's not the part of the army. You call it a rebellion because they were fighting for concessions. So the reason becomes very simply the concept of corruption. Second, they have said that the Ukrainian war is not going as per plan, and therefore we are taking a lot of casualties. And now the major issue which has come out is that the Minister of Defense, or the Defense Minister of Russia, he has been now named as a person who went into Ukraine with personal interest, having no plan itself. We already know that Russia did not think it through. It did not think about the NATO angle itself. It used the indifference of the NATO towards Ukraine to enter it. But this has now revealed a lot of fault lines within Russia. Russia was seen as a patriotic whole itself. But now with PMC Wagner rebelling, it has now become an important moment in Russian history, looking towards the 1917, 1918, what we call as the civil war between Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. But very simply, it becomes a very important moment in which Putin has to manage it well. If not, Wagner Group capturing power is also not good for India. We have to see it from our perspective. Putin is pro-India in that regard, a little bit problematic sense in how we are becoming more closer to the US. But the simple point of the matter is, Wagner Group capturing power only shows, or trying to capture power only shows, that not everything is well within the what we call as geopolitics or the politics of this area itself. So before I go into the nitty gritty, let me repeat what I've told you in the past 20-25 minutes. First, PMC Wagner, private military company. It's a mercenary soldier based company in which they have a private group of people who want to fight for a nation, not because of patriotism, but with the concept of money. So it's a private company which funds people to fight for you, and they get all modern equipment. First emerged properly during the Crimean Peninsula annexation, which was part of Ukraine itself, now part of Russia allegedly. Thereafter, it became very, very popular in Africa. But once the Ukrainian war started, or the Ukrainian crisis started, it became extremely active. 50,000 soldiers were there. With the Ukrainian war not going as per plan because of NATO intervention, PMC Wagner has now rebelled against Putin. However, he has been able to find a middle ground, but only reveals issues related to the politics of Russia and gives us a deja vu moment. Something like this has previously also happened, from the February Revolution to the October Revolution to the civil war within Russia during or just before the Second World War. So therefore, this does not come as a surprise to us, but for us, it is important that the Russian polity remains stable and private groups or private players don't capture power. Does this make sense? Who supplies them modern weapons? The Russian army. PMC Wagner is based from St. Petersburg in Russia itself. Yes. Okay. So till this point, basic point, because I'm trying to give you the conceptual part. If you will understand the conceptual part, you will be able to answer any type of question. Causes of rebellion: corruption, the Ukrainian war not going as per plan, the interest of the defense minister, and generally Russia becoming more and more weak in that sense. PMC's presence is not what we call as an indicator of nationalism. PMC's presence means that the government wants private mercenaries to fight for them. Okay. Can I now go into the nitty gritty? Can we go into the smaller aspects related to the topic itself? Then I'll give you a summary in the end again. Yes. How do you differentiate between mutiny, revolt? Again, mutiny is when the army rebels. Coup is when the army tries to capture power. Myanmar. Thereafter, rebellion is when you fight for concessions. Revolt is when you fight to remove somebody. That is why you would know that the revolt of 1857, we don't call it a mutiny of 1857, we don't call it a rebellion of 1857. We call it revolt of 1857 because we try to overthrow the British. When you try to overthrow, it's called a revolt. Okay. Mutiny was not crushed but controlled by Russia itself. Okay. You want me to write this? See, mutiny, a very simple thing. If you've done modern India with me, you would know. Mutiny is when the army rebels. Coup is when the army tries to capture power. Rebellion is when you fight for concessions. Revolt is when you fight to overthrow a power or individual. So that is why I'm not calling it mutiny, because it's not the army, it's a private mercenary group. I can't call it a coup because, again, coup is the army, armed forces trying to capture power. Rebellion is the right word because that is what PWC Wagner, PMC Wagner wanted in that sense. Okay. Bolshevik, again, Bolshevik Revolution based on Vladimir Lenin's understanding, Russian Revolution 1917. If you don't know it, don't worry. We'll discuss it in class in that sense. Okay. Okay. Now, let's go into the integrity now. Let's talk about the things which have been unfolding. So, dramatic events have happened in Russia with the Wagner private military company marching towards Moscow, have sent a lot of problematic shockwaves across the world, which is not a good thing in that sense. Now, what is the Wagner Group? The Wagner Group, officially known as PMC Wagner, is a mercenary organization first identified in 2014 during the annexation of Crimea. Thereafter, essentially a network of contractors that supply soldiers for hire, and group got registered as a company in 2022 and has the headquarters in Russia itself, St. Petersburg. Wagner Group remained mostly very small till the Ukrainian war happened. 5,000 soldiers were there. But since the Ukrainian crisis, 50,000 soldiers have been very simply deployed by the private military company Wagner or PMC Wagner, and they have emerged as a very important force which has been used by Putin in that sense. Now, since 2014, as their existence, it is not that it has not been exported to other countries. In 2015 to 18 period, Syria, they were very important. In Libya, Sudan, in the Central African Republic, thereafter Mozambique, and as of recently in Mali, they have become very important because now they are also under the scanner of the EU because of the war crimes which they are doing. So mostly used by the wrong side or the side which uses a lot of aggression. The PMC Wagner as of right now had become a very favorite body or a favorite institution used by all the dictators or aggressors to fight for them against the government, and it was profiteering quite a lot from all the conflict which is there in Africa. Now, very simply, their numbers swelled after 2022 once the Ukrainian sector came in, once the Ukrainian war set in. Thereafter, Putin pushed the PMC Wagner quite a lot, and it had become like a parallel army itself and much more powerful than the army in that sense. Now, how did things start? So, the March of Justice started with the Wagner Group's chief, Yevgeny. We have Prigozhin. Prigozhin is a businessman. He is very close to Putin itself. And he's the one who went with this rebellion, who said that we will not fight for the Russians now. We have suffered a lot of different casualties. And this gives us a very deja vu moment in which we've seen these moments in Russia previously also, from the Russian Civil War, from the Bolshevik Revolution to the October to the February Revolution. We've seen in just after this First World War itself, moments in which Russia army rebelling and capturing power is quite common in that sense. So it's deja vu in the sense, very simply, it gives us a moment in which it's not something new. It has happened in Russia, and Russia has this tendency. Now, for us and for you, what is important as a UPSC aspirant is what are the reasons? Why did it happen? And here the reasons are quite straightforward. First, he argued corruption. We know that Russian army is quite corrupt. They are not using their resources quite well. Moreover, they have been misappropriating a lot of funds. Their deployments have been useless. Russian strategy has mostly been useless across the First and the Second World War. And very simply, poor decision making has been leading to high casualties. And the aspect of Ukraine war itself has now been questioned. Why are we in Ukraine is now a question which has been asked by PMC Wagner, because they are not able to push into Ukraine further. And very simply, Russia has lost a lot of troops, Wagner Group has lost a lot of troops, and therefore the aspect related to the defense minister having a private ambition, a personal ambition in going into Ukraine has now come into question. So, therefore, the rebellion questions the basic point itself, which is that why are we fighting in the Russia Ukraine crisis? And very simply, people thought it would be easier to go into Ukraine and capture power. But Ukraine has given very strong resistance due to NATO support itself. So, when it comes to the reasons which is more important for you, it is based on the concept of corruption, wrong moves, and why this war itself. Because now Russia is paying for being into this crisis generally. Now, what is the current status? Putin, in order to diffuse the situation, said that the people who have rebelled, I'm not going to prosecute them. I'm not going to send them to jail. I'm giving you three options. Either you can become an army member, you sign a contract with the defense ministry, become a soldier, or you go back home if wherever you have come from, or you can go to the neighboring country called Belarus and you can find employment there. I am open to that. He has also argued that these people are patriots. I have no issues with them. But for Russia, it's a jolting moment. So let's try to understand the larger picture here and how does it implicate India. Can we do this? I've now revised with you second time. Now I want to go into the larger picture implications for you and me and for a UPSC aspirant, for a future IFS officer. What does this actually mean and what does this actually show? Okay. Now, very simply, see, Russia is a very important defense supplier to India. And over and above that, as of right now, natural gas and oil, India has doubled once Russia was not able to pay or was not able to sell to the EU market. And that has also led to energy inflation. A general recessionary trend is in the world because of the Russia Ukraine crisis. Separate issue altogether. Now, for India, Putin, though seen as a monster, he is a dictator. There's a very simple drama of democracy, if you want to say. He is acting like a dictator. But the for India, Putin has been quite positive in the sense the relationship between Putin and India has always moved strength to strength. With S-400 missile defense technology or the anti-ballistic missile defense technology has been just recently been given to India. We have BrahMos, we have nuclear, what we call as cooperation, a lot of different nuclear reactors in Tamil Nadu, and the new ones which are coming up are also in consonance and in cooperation with Russia. And therefore, Russia as a state, as a nation, has always stood by India. So, India, therefore, is in a precarious situation. India does not obviously want the Wagner Group to win because that undercuts the interest of India generally. On the other hand, India does not want this to precipitate into something bigger because then Indian diplomatic position will become problematic. Why? Because as of right now, India's basic strategy has been we have an independent relationship with Russia. Whatever the NATO is doing, that is not going to dictate how we interact with Russia. And therefore, very simply, we want to support the economic and social part. Political is of no purpose to us. But the more the crisis becomes bigger, the more India has to now take sides. As of right now, India is sitting in between NATO and Russia. And that is also a very good strategy. As the new concept is not called non-alignment, it's called all alignment. We align with everybody. We have an independent relationship with everyone. We will align with everybody in a different way altogether. Now, this shows that Russia is fragile. Russia is not bulletproof. And therefore, we need to make sure that before things go out of hand, we are able to secure our interest. That is the basic point here. Indian interest as of right now is to make sure that defense and oil, natural gas, and energy from Russia can come without any issues. And more than that, if we have to support Russia in this hour of need, we should and we have been. However, that puts us at odds with NATO, with the US, and that is where we are on a tightrope itself. So it's a strategic alignment. We need to see where we can take it in that sense. So, very simply, the Russia Ukraine crisis, why am I discussing it with you here? Is because it has a lot of implication on Indian defense and diplomatic policy. And therefore, we need to make sure that we find a middle ground, make sure that Putin does not go anywhere. Because we can't say that the West is the best, because West is equally useless. They are equally problematic, they are equally finicky, they are equally moody. And I don't say that NATO is the best. No, no. America is equally useless power. America has never stood by India. We'll talk about exceptionism and exceptionalism. I'm not saying that we should support NATO, because NATO, at the end of the day, they are in a crisis. They are still taking oil from Russia. They want India to take a stern stance. We don't care. So our policy has been very straightforward. You will not dictate how we interact with Russia. However, we are being pushed into a corner slowly, and we need to find a way out. Make sense? The larger implication of how it comes out. Maybe Wagner was given money by the US. That is Ashmi standard thing which America does. America created Saddam Hussein. America created Gaddafi. America created the ISIS. America even created the Taliban, which is now basically taken over Afghanistan. America has done this, and there could be a major role in which America would have funded Wagner Group also, that you rebel. But the point is, destabilization of Russia is not good for India. That is what I'm trying to argue here. There's a certain sense of what we call as animosity towards Russia. Russia is doing what it understands well. However, we tend to argue that Russia is wrong. This has always been the picture across the world. But for us, Russia has always been there. Beat any of the wars with China, beat any of the wars with Pakistan, it has always been there. So we need to find a middle ground. We are in a very tight spot in that sense. Make sense? Can we look at the mains question which can come from this area? Okay, perfect. So this is the type of question which you can expect in GS paper 2 based on international relations. The Wagner Group has revealed the fault lines in Russian politics. Comment. So very simply, this gives you space to write your own understanding. Why? Because it is asking you comment. Now, as you know, for anybody who's new, basic structure of an answer is like this: introduction, body, conclusion. Never write it. It's in your structure, it's in your mind. Here, keep it paragraph, keep it point wise, keep it paragraph. That way it looks aesthetically good also. In the introduction, you have to write the current affairs aspect. That recently there was the March of Justice in which Wagner Group tried to capture power in Russia. Now in the body, you have to talk about three things. First, you have to talk about where does the Wagner Group come from? Where does the Wagner Group come from? Thereafter, you have to talk about why have they rebelled or why have they mutinied. And thereafter, you have to discuss in the last part of the body and conclusion the implications. The implications is that not everything is well within Russia, and that has an implication on Indian foreign policy, and therefore this is a concerning trend which has come through. You can write this answer and you can send it to islive@byju's.com, and we'll be happy to check this for you. You can always send it to islive@byju's.com, and you can send it, write it, scan it, send it, and you will within 3 to 4 days get a what we call as checked copy in that sense. Okay. So before I move on to the next topic, I'm repeating everything again. Third revision with me, and then we will move to the second aspect. First, very simply, conclusion is Shakib still pending. This is something which is still developing. So these are things in which we have to see how it goes forward. Conclusion here, it will be implication. What is the implication of this move itself? Now, First point, PMC Wagner, mercenary group, a group which is basically a private army used for the first time in 2014. Ukraine became bigger, Crimean Peninsula first, thereafter in Africa, then became bigger in the Ukrainian crisis, has rebelled against Russia or Putin because of the casualties, corruption, and the strategies itself, shows fault lines in Russia, has an implication on India. No issues? Can we move to the next topic? That is true that on one hand they're giving the victim card, they're giving them cluster bombs also. See, they are hypocrites. The West is a hypocrite. They will do what they don't want you to do. And therefore, that is why it's called Cold War 2.0, in the sense that this is the same Iron Curtain type situation in which it's now the West versus Russia. Russia has always been on this radar since the concept of the Bolshevik Revolution, since 1917. Russian Revolution represented the birth of socialism. Now it's not socialism, but very simply it's the concept of Russian domination. So across world history, you would see different aspects of what we call as villains. First, it was Austria, thereafter, it was Germany, thereafter, it became Russia, and since then, it has been Russia in that sense. And in that way, now Russia, China have become a very important complex of enemies for everybody. So, we'll see how this develops further. Belarus has taken it because Belarus is getting strategic, what we call as nuclear weapons from Russia. And Belarus and Russia is quite close in that sense. Okay, you can send it to Target IS also, no issues. That is totally your call. Target IS @byju's.com. Totally your call. Send it to any. Okay, now we move to the second topic, which is the Finance Commission and the road ahead. Can we talk about the second topic? Is everybody comfortable with what we've done till this point? Yes? No? Come on. Yes? Okay, great. Now, very simply, we now have to discuss the Finance Commission. Now, you all have done your polity. If you've not done your polity, I'll discuss what is the Finance Commission. So, under Article 280, the President will appoint a Finance Commission every 5 years, and the basic task of the Finance Commission is what is called horizontal and vertical devolution of divisibility pool of taxation. Now, this is very what we call as technical terminology. I'll give you a very simple concept. The simple concept is the center collects certain taxes, but those taxes are also collected on the behalf of the states. So in India, we have a federal structure in which you have states and the center. Center has its own what we call as Consolidated Fund of India, and you have the states which have their own Consolidated Fund of States. The center collects specifically income tax is collected on behalf of the state itself. So therefore, the center has collected taxes, for example, rupees 100. This is the number that is the tax which has been collected total by center, but there's a share which the state also has in it because it is a federal structure and the center can't keep everything. So now the concept is this tax which has been collected by the center on the behalf of center and state both needs to be divided. Now, how or who divides it? And in that sense, the Finance Commission plays a very important role because the division of the divisibility pool of taxation, the division of this money, this is the divisibility pool, is done by the Finance Commission. Finance Commission very simply says, how much will the center get out of this 100 rupees? How much will the states get? This is called vertical devolution. It's called vertical devolution. Devolution means division. That out of this 100 rupees, for example, very simply, as of right now, it is 41% to the states. We'll not take that example. But for example, it says 60 rupees will go to center, 40 rupees will go to states. This is called vertical devolution. That out of this 100, Finance Commission says 60-40 is the ratio. Now, this is the easier part. This is the easier part. Why? Because vertical devolution is between two entities, center state. The more difficult part here is called horizontal devolution. Horizontal devolution is basically out of this 40 rupees, which state will get how much? Horizontally, we are dividing which state will get how much. This is the more difficult start or difficult part, because this should be based on certain criterias, and therefore every state gets certain money as per certain weightage and percentage of certain indicators. We'll talk about that later. The first and foremost task is division based on vertical and horizontal. Very simply, try to understand this. If you can't understand it, I'm again repeating myself. Finance Commission is constituted by the president. The role of the Finance Commission, 16th this one, 15th is already there. 16th Finance Commission will decide out of the taxes. For example, uh, Avantadega, you tell me, I pay tax to the income tax department. Yes or no? Who do you pay taxes to? You pay the taxes to income tax department? Yes, very good. Now the income tax department reports to the center or the state? Center or state? IT comes under center or state? Center. Very good. Now when I've given, for example, 1 lakh rupee as income tax, is it fair that though the center and the states have to work in India, should that 1 lakh be with only the center? No. States are the ones who give you the last mile governance, and therefore they also should get something. Now, who decides out of that 1 lakh rupee which I've given, how much should be given to state and how much should center keep? If you leave it to the center will say, I will keep 100, you take 0. If you will say to the state will say, I will keep 100, you take 0. So a quasi-judicial body is created, which is called a Finance Commission, which is going to very simply say, okay, we have certain indicators. Center has this much expenditure. The center has this much receipts. We believe that 60 rupees should be kept by center for running the Indian government, and 40 rupees should go to, or 60,000 should be kept by center. 40,000 should be kept or given to states. This is the easier part, because dividing between center state is easy because there are two entities, states and center. Think of it like this. I'll give you a very simple example. Father or mother, modern India, they get a salary of, for example, 1 lakh rupee. Now, vertical devolution is when your father gives your mother or your mother gives your father, say, take 50,000. This is the division between you and me. I will keep 50,000 to run the basic, the household. I'll give rent, I'll give the petrol money. 50,000 is now what you keep to run the day-to-day business. Is this easier or is this hard? 50-50. This is easier or hard? Vertical devolution is easier or hard? It is easy because there is only two entities. Now, under the mother, there are 4 children, A, B, C, and D. Out of that 50,000, A will also get something, B will also get something, C will also get something, D will also get something. Now, you tell me, is it easy to horizontally divide this money, or it is hard to divide this? It is hard, because if you give A more, it is problematic. If you give B more, it is problematic. If you give C more, it is problematic. If you give D more, anybody who gets something will be problematic. This is the task of the Finance Commission: vertical and horizontal devolution. Is this point clear? This is the static portion. proper polity part I've discussed with you, the concept of vertical and horizontal devolution. Yes, great. Now, how do we divide this money? We have now come to the horizontal part. How do you divide it amongst the states? And in order to divide it amongst the states, there are certain what we call as indicators on which the states have to perform. These indicators, for example, one is called tax effort. The second one is called demographic performance. The third one is called income distance. Thereafter, it is called forest and ecology. Then it is called area, and then the last one is called population. The weightage is as per follows. Tax effort is 2.5% of the weightage. Demographic performance 12.5%. This is 15 Finance Commission. 45% goes to income distance. Thereafter 10%, 15%, and 15%. Now, what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is, if you will perform on these indicators in a certain way, you will get out of that 40 rupees something. Tax effort means how much revenue receipt and capital receipts are you ready to take? How are you trying to perform in a certain way to get as much as possible through taxes, state taxes? Demographic performances, are you trying to make sure that the fertility rate in your state is going down? This is a new indicator which was added in 15th Finance Commission. Income distance means per capita income, what is the distance? In the sense, one person is earning 1 lakh rupees, the other one is earning 1 rupee. So the income distance is more than 100%. And therefore, this is not good. Basically, income distance is how much poverty and how much what we call as rich people are there. So the distance between the rich people and the income distance between the rich and the poor. Finance Commission would be a constitutional body because it is mentioned in the Constitution, Article 280. You're still asking the same thing. Listen to me. Thereafter, then you'll ask me the same thing once I've moved forward. I've said Article 280, so it's a constitutional body. Now, first, very simple point: tax effort, demographic performance, income distance. Forest and ecology means if you are trying to be green as possible, sustainable. Area and population. Area 15%, population 15%. Why am I telling you this? Because there's a controversy which is going to come through income distance disparity, same thing. Yeah, income disparity would be a better word in that sense. You don't have to learn this. I'm trying to give you this concept very simply, that Finance Commission is going to divide vertically, there's no issue there. But horizontally, it is divided according to certain weightages: tax effort, demographic performance, income distance, area, population, forest, and ecology. Now, if you look at this basic thing, if a state has very small area but very big population, will it be a problem for the Finance Commission? Yes or no? It will be a problem because the weightage under area is very less, but population is very high. Now, I am, for example, a state like UP. Very big area, very big population. Out at that 15%, I'm at 14%. And my demographic performance is zero. This is one example. Now, there's an example, for example, Kerala. Comes in middling when it comes to area, but very good population, demographic performance 12.5%, but very low population. Now here, who has an advantage, Kerala or UP? UP, because what it has done is, in 15%, it has got 30%, out of that it's got 28%. But in demographic performance, it got zero. But Kerala performed well in demographic performance, but it did not do it. It was not very good in population and area. What I mean to say is, demographic performance means that how good you are in making sure that the population rate has gone down, fertility rate has gone down. This is the problem. This is the problem, wherein there are too many permutation and combinations. Now, here I want to discuss with you the real reason why we're discussing this topic. I need a blank slide. Now, before I do that, please try to understand. I'm trying to go as much as in theory as much as possible. First things first, the concept of horizontal and vertical devolution is clear. You understand the need for finance commission, and you understand the basic indicators which are there, because then I will talk about what are the reasons why we are discussing this topic. These four things are clear. You don't have to learn it. Once the new finance commission is going to come, that is going to be relevant for you. I'm just trying to show you a conundrum which is there, a dilemma which is there. We are clear with regards to finance commission. We're clear with regards to vertical and horizontal devolution. We also are clear with regards to why horizontal devolution is problematic. And now we are going to discuss the debates which are there. Can I do that? Everyone, come on. Yes. Okay. Now, see, finance commission, the first question which will come to the finance commission is that you increase state's share in vertical devolution, which is that as of right now, 41% of the 100% is given to the states. So 59% is kept by the center. It used to be 42%, reduced by 1% once Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh became a UT, because that was an expenditure on Jammu and Kashmir and UT by the center itself. So very simply, the states will say, no, you increase it to 50%, you increase it to 60%. With regards to that, it is very, very clear that this is not possible, because the center already has a lot of burden, and with fiscal deficit and a lot of issues with regards to the expenditure on what we call as making sure that we don't go beyond a certain limit in the deficit and in revenue deficit itself. This is the point which will not go through. This will not go through. The problematic criteria is the three things which the Finance Commission has to decide. The first issue will be population when it comes to horizontal devolution. See, very simply, till the 14th Finance Commission, 1971 census was used so that the states which had become very big in population or which had not done well in demographic performance would not get an advantage. However, in the 15th Finance Commission, for the first time, 2011, which is the latest census available to us, 2011 population data was used. Now, as soon as this happened, states which were performing well in controlling their population, performing well in lowering their fertility rate, performing well in making sure that their population does not go beyond a certain what we call as indicator or a certain limit. For example, Gujarat, for example, Kerala, for example, Northeast. Now they are at a disadvantage. They're in a disadvantage. Why? Because they are being penalized for performing good. I'll give you a very simple example of this, and you all will be able to understand it. You are four friends sitting in a restaurant. You're four friends sitting at a restaurant, and you've ordered something to eat. All of you get equal portions, but you are a good manager. Your friends eat up very quickly. They ate their food, but you have managed well. You've saved close to 50% of your food in that regard. Now, what is going to happen? As soon as they will finish their plates, what will they do? They will eat from your plate. You are being penalized for performing good, or very simply, you managed your resources well, but you are being penalized because others did not do that. Herein comes the concept of population performance. Kerala, which has managed its population well, brought down its fertility less than 1%, it it will get less amount from Finance Commission, because on population indicator it will be low. UP, which did not use its resources well, did not stop its fertility rate, has now swelled up its population, will get more money, though it is a better performing state as per GDP. If you look at the GDP, state GDP of UP and state GDP of Kerala, UP is a better performing state. But Finance Commission will give more money to UP and less money to Kerala. Why? Because population data got skewed. This is a major contagious issue which is going to come to the 16th Finance Commission, because this is somewhere the good performers are getting penalized. This is why we are having this discussion. 15th Finance Commission introduced the demographic performance indicator, in which 12.5% weightage was given to states which were performing well on demography or on population. But because it is only 12.5%, and if you're a big state with big population, you will automatically get more. The point is, it is a mathematical nightmare to make sure how does Kerala come out of this in an advantageous way. So is the first major issue clear, how population will become a problem for the 16th Finance Commission? First point. Is this clear? Yes, very good. Now the second issue which is going to come in front of the Finance Commission is called revenue deficit grant. Now, there are two types of receipts. Receipts means when you get some income. One is called revenue, the other one is called capital. However, what is more important for us is called revenue expenditure, capital expenditure. Any form of expenditure which is done on assets, hospitals, school, roads, is called a capital expenditure. Capital expenditure are considered good because they create assets, and in the long run they will provide support to the state. On the other hand, you have what is called revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure is repetitive expenditure which does not actually give you anything. Salaries, pension, if you're paying off interest of a certain loan, these are called revenue expenditure, repetitive, non-asset creating. Now, under the Finance Commission, there's a concept. If after horizontal devolution, your revenue receipts are less than your revenue expenditure, or your revenue expenditure is more than your revenue receipt, so there is what is called a revenue deficit. In the sense, your expenditure is more than your receipt, therefore there's a deficit. Now, for example, the deficit was rupees 10. So the Finance Commission gives a grant to pay off that 10 rupees. Why does the Finance Commission do that? It does it because revenue receipts are equity. Basically, every state should be able to give equal salary to its bureaucrats, should be able to give equal salary to its employees. No state should not be able to perform because of their economic issues. Now, revenue deficit grant has now become, receipt means money coming in. Revenue deficit grant has become problematic because, very simply, of what we call as fiscal irresponsibility. See, I am a state. I do not have the capacity to increase my receipt. So I'm a genuine case. That my expenditure is more, but my receipt is less. I'm a genuine case. For example, MP, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand. But there are certain states who technically do not deserve this grant, but they categorically keep their revenue expenditure high so that they get this grant from the Finance Commission. This is called fiscal irresponsibility. In the sense, I am very simply, categorically making sure that my expenditure exceeds my receipt. I'm not trying to increase my revenue receipts because I don't want this grant to go away. This is called fiscal irresponsibility, and the Finance Commission has been able to identify that the states are doing this fraud. In the sense, they are not trying to make up this deficit or gap in order to get more money out of the Finance Commission. This is the technical aspect here, wherein revenue deficit grants have become problematic generally because states which don't deserve it are getting it, the states which deserve it are not getting it. Make sense? We'll go into the nitty-gritty of the PPT also. I'm trying to explain it to you. Third and the last issue is what we have to discuss. First point, population. Second point is a grant which is given by Finance Commission to make up for any deficit if it is there when it comes to revenue, expenditure, and receipt. States which are actually do not deserve it because they have the capacity to increase receipts are not doing it so as to get more money out of Finance Commission. Very simply, I can pay, but I'm still not paying. But somebody who needs it is not getting it because I am getting it. So it's like a subsidy in that sense. And therefore, this subsidy is being misused by states itself. Now, the last point which we have to discuss before we go into the nitty-gritty is a very simple point, which is the issue of surcharges and cess. See, there are two types of taxes. This is again proper pure economics. There are two types of taxes. One is called tax, the other one is called surcharge and cess. When 100 rupees is collected as tax, there's a division which is going to happen based on Finance Commission, which is 4159. However, cess and surcharge is a tax on a tax, surcharge, cess. But the beauty of a cess and surcharge is if 100 rupees is there and 5 rupees is surcharge, surcharge straight away goes into the pocket of the center. And what has recently been pointed out is the center, in order to bypass the Finance Commission or finance devolution, is increasing the surcharges and cesses more and keeping the taxes the same level. Very simply, they are taking away the share of the state by putting more on cess and surcharge. This is the catch here. 5 years back, 10% of all receipts of the center was from cess and surcharge. Now it is 20%. Basically, this 5 rupees will not get added to the divisibility pool. And that is why the center is increasing this more and keeping this same. So very simply, these states are feeling cheated that they are not getting the money they should get. So very simply, these are the three major issues which are going to emerge when the 16th Finance Commission is going to come and talk about its basic concepts. First, population. Second, revenue deficit grant. Third, cess and surcharge issue, which needs to be now regulated because it is becoming a problem. Are these 3 points clear? If they are, then we'll go into the nitty-gritty of the topic through the PPT. I'm going to repeat everything, but now through the PPT. Yes? Very good. Okay. Now, let's talk about it. Yes. So the government is very soon going to constitute the Finance Commission on the recommendation of the president itself. And it is going to be a game changer because a lot of different concepts are going to come through. And with regards to vertical and horizontal sharing formula, the Finance Commission has played a very important role. What is the importance of the Finance Commission? Before the liberalization, privatization, globalization in 1991, Finance Commission did not have a major role because the Planning Commission used to give a lot of money to the states. But since the LPG, which is called since 1991, and since the what we call as changeover from Planning Commission to Niti Aayog, Finance Commission plays a very important role in what is called fiscal federalism. In the sense, how will money get divided into two parts? Now, currently, the center gives away 41% of the tax to the states. States will ask for raising their portion, but there is no real room with regards to it. it will rather be the horizontal distribution formula which is going to come into question. Here, the first question is going to be raised over population. When the Finance Commission was previously appointed in 2017, it took up the 2011 population figures, and in that sense, states have now started to argue that because you're taking the latest census in which we have controlled our population, we are paying a penalty for good performance. This is the first issue which is going to come. The second issue is going to be related to the revenue deficit grants. The Finance Commission, now please listen to me, awards states which remains in deficit on the current account even after tax devolution. If there's still a deficit in revenue in its current account, because even after giving them money there's a problem, the Finance Commission will give them money so that every state has equal money when it comes to revenue expenditure. So in theory, revenue deficit grants are made on the rationale that every state should have the capacity to provide for minimal level of services to its population. Now, the problem is that how have we now created an incentive to not perform? Because if you perform well, your grant goes down. So very simply, we have created states which are fiscally irresponsible. So the core issue here is Finance Commission has struggled to determine how much a state's deficit is due to its fiscal incapability or its fiscal irresponsibility. This is the word which you need to understand. They have tried to tweak the formula in such a way that the states which are actually incapable should not get penalized because of the states which are irresponsible. However, that is in itself problematic because that is a mathematical nightmare. Because how do you decide about that? As it is, the net distribution formula is going to come into question because of the population issue generally. The more bigger issue within vertical devolution is going to be cess and surcharge, wherein the Tamil Nadu government did a survey and it found that in 2011-12, 10.4% of the revenue of the center used to come from cess and surcharge, while now 20.2% comes from it. And because cess and surcharge is not part of the divisibility pool, a tax on tax, it is now being used by the center to evade the divisibility or division to the states. So very straightforward. If the center gets 1 rupee, it has to give 41 paisas to the state. But if it has a surcharge, it does not have to give anything. It keeps everything. So therefore, the Finance Commission has to find a way to bring up a formula in which the center needs to be disincentivized to go for cess and surcharge generally. So therefore, before we go to the mains question, this topic is quite interesting and something which is quite theoretical, comes in GS paper 2. What are the challenges? What are the challenges in front of the next Finance Commission? There are very simply three basic challenges. So you will write in the what we call as the introduction, the context in which the new Finance Commission is going to be constituted. There will be three challenges which the body needs to talk about. First is the issue of population. Second is the issue of revenue deficit grant, which is based on the concept of fiscal incapability and responsibility, and thereafter surcharge and cesses being used by the center to bypass the Finance Commission. And conclude by saying that once the basic what we call as Finance Commission is going to be constituted, these questions need to be answered as soon as possible. Example of cess and surcharge. I'll give you a very simple example. When you give your income tax, you will see income tax, it will say, for example, rupees 100, and then it will say education cess, what we call as developmental cess, and this is rupees 20 and this is rupees 50. So do you think this 70 rupees is going to the state? No. 100 rupees is going to be divided into 5941, but this 70 rupees will straight away go to the center. This is where the problem is. What is the conclusion? The conclusion is the Finance Commission needs to be conscious of these issues and needs to resolve it as quickly as possible without penalizing states which are performing well on certain indicators. Make sense? Everybody? Clear? Finance Commission. I put in a lot of time in these two topics, quite technical. I hope it is right. Cross subsidization means that you're subsidizing a state from the money of someone else's or some other state itself. Okay. Now, Coal India versus CCI. Can I talk about this? Come on. We can talk about this topic. Right. Okay. Now, Coal India is a very good example of what we call as a PSU. It's called a PSU, Public Sector Undertaking. This is an old giant of what we call as a socialistic mixed economy, which we have. Public sector undertaking are basically companies which were nationalized. Nationalized means that they were controlled by the government. Coal India Limited, CIL or Coal India, is one of the biggest coal producers and distributors in India. Though the share of the state has gone down, when the center takes away the share of its from a PSU, what is it called? Economics. Yes, disinvestment. Very good. Disinvestment. So, very simply, though the center has disinvested from CIL, but still it is a substantial portion. CCI is Competition Commission of India. Now, there's a tussle between CIL and Competition Commission of India. Let's talk about the core issue here. CIL or Coal India Limited is one of the most important distributors to all the what are called discoms. Discoms are different companies which produce electricity to thermal power plants and send it to the consumer. For example, you have in Bangalore you have BBMP, or you have what is called the different distribution companies which sell to people. Discoms, distribution companies. Now, very simply, the CIL will give them coal. The coal will be used in a thermal power plant, and thereafter electricity will be generated and sent to the consumer. Now, what the Competition Commission of India, which represents a body which sees that there is no monopolistic behavior, which is that a company starts to act like a dictator or a monopoly. That is why there's a lot of news which you will see between CCI and Google, in which CCI and Google have been fighting, and now that is why you can actually uninstall the Google apps from the new Android phones because of a CCI suit over Google, that Google was acting like a monopolistic behavior. There's a Google issue with regards to Android. There's a Google issue with regards to how it has become the monopoly in advertisements. It has become a major monopoly when it comes to news. And CCI is competition. Listen to me, Competition Commission of India. CIL is a Coal India Limited. So CIL, CCI, right? Now, CCI makes sure that competition is healthy in the market. Now, recently, the CCI imposed a major penalty on this Coal India Limited, saying that Coal India Limited has been practicing certain behavior which is derogatory, which is discriminatory, and which is monopolistic and not good for the market. And what the CCI has accused Coal India is that Coal India is providing bad or low grade coal at high prices to discoms, to distribution companies. And it has created an opaque and very, very discriminatory system of supply in which the discoms can't do anything to Coal India Limited. So the CCI has argued that Coal India Limited is acting like a monopoly, and very simply because it is a PSU, it cannot do that. So what Coal India Limited did, do you understand the accusation of CCI to Coal India? That Coal India Limited, which is a PSU, has acted like a monopoly, has given low grade coal at high prices, and is controlling supply, which is not good for the market generally, because the coal which is going to the thermal power plant are low grade, and it is producing less electricity also. So are we clear with regards to the acquisition? Come on. Are we clear with regards to the acquisition of Coal India Limited on the of CCI on Coal India Limited? Yes, we are. Okay. Now, Coal India Limited, in order to evade this tax, is this penalty, went to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, it ordered or it argued two things. It said, this is CIL. Listen. Half of you either see or half of you just listen. Look and see. Both senses need to be used. Now, very simply, Coal India argued that we were created as a monopoly under the Nationalization Act. Under the Nationalization Act, we were created as a monopoly, and we provide essential commodity, and because we are rupees 9,000 crore in debt, we should be exempted from the purview of Competition Commission of India. What it is basically arguing is PSUs should not be part of Competition Commission of India concept, because we are for the greater good. We are doing essential commodities. We are giving essential goods. We were created as a monopoly. Now you tell me, in 2023, does this logic actually work? That we are essential commodity, we are PSUs, and PSUs should not be what we call as under the scope of competition. And PSUs with public sector undertaking, written there. PSU, Sanchit, on the screen. Look at it. PSU, public sector undertaking. Now, very simply, a very good example of this is going to be what? MTNL, BSNL, loss producing, because they don't care itself, because they know that they are going to get money from the government irrespective of if they have subscribers or customers or not. Now the this Competition Commission of India, counter argued in the Supreme Court, and this is a very important point. The counter argument which was given by Competition Commission of India was based on a committee which becomes important for you. It's called the Raghavan Committee. The Raghavan Committee or Commission, which was constituted on the request of the Competition Commission of India in 2020, it argued that inefficiency of PSUs should not be tolerated because it is a loss to the country itself. Very good point. Very simply, Raghavan Committee says that PSUs cannot be these big monsters which take up the money of the people, and they became inefficient. And CCI argues, Competition Commission argues very simply that PSUs cannot work outside the purview of the Competition Commission, because the concept of essential commodities has ceased to exist since 2007, and since 2017 itself, the Coal Nationalization Act, which used to be part of the ninth schedule, which is that it could not be taken to court, non-justiciable part, has also come out of that. So very simply, the word which the CCI has actually used is called competitive. This is why I'm teaching this concept. Neutrality. The concept is there needs to be competitive neutrality between a private and a public player. And for us, and it's a good thing, the Supreme Court has said that the argument of Coal India has no merit. And therefore, Coal India should be, will be, and will remain under the preview of the Competition Commission of India. Now you get the point. Three terms are very important for you: public sector undertaking, the concept of monopolistic behavior, the concept of Raghavan Committee, which says that inefficiency is not good for the country, and competitive neutrality. that when it comes to private and public players, a public player cannot be lethargic, cannot be inefficient, because it is a public player and it knows that the money is going to come from the government. A loss to a PSU is loss of your and mine money, which is public exchequer's money. Ultimate burden is as it is on the people. And this is what has been argued, yes, Pulkit, by the CCI also to the Coal India, that if you sell coal at a higher price, because the discoms are going to transfer it to the consumer. So very simply, I'll write the, Tanushri, don't worry, I'll write the point down. It is named after Raghavan because the chairman was Raghavan. So therefore, CCI, CIL, tussle. Can we go into the nitty-gritty and then we'll talk about the other issues itself? Smaller, I'll go into the details now. Very good. Okay. Now, on 15 June, the Supreme Court has said that there's no merit in Coal India, a public sector undertaking, in being excluded from the preview of the Competition Act itself. The court was hearing a PSU's appeal against the Competition Appellate Tribunal's order for abusing its position as the most important supplier. Now, what is the concept? The core issue is there was a 591 crore penalty applied by Competition Commission of India in March of 2017, all Coal India Limited, saying that it did unfair discriminatory practices when it came to fuel supply to the different producers of electricity, and as a supplier of non-coking coal, it had acted in a discriminatory behavior. Therefore, CIL, in very simple words, was supplying lower quality of essential resources at higher prices and had opaque conditions when it came to supply parameters and quality. Regulator argued that Coal India and its subsidiaries were acting independent of market sources and market forces and enjoyed a dominant position which they were abusing. Now, the PSU's argument is very simple, that it operates for common good and equitable distribution of essential natural resources. It is a monopoly under Nationalization Act of 1973. It was secured and created by as a monopoly itself. And because it has a loss of close to 9,000 crores, as it is, it can also not operate in commercial space. Now, very simply, the CCI responded by arguing that the Raghavan Committee 2020 report argued that if state monopolies work like this, they are not conducive in the best interest of the nation. They should not be allowed to work in inefficiency and should operate in competition. Furthermore, the concept of essential commodities has been removed since 2007, and the Nationalization Act has now become what we call as justiciable. You can take it to the court once it has been removed from the 9th schedule in 2017. Therefore, because 80% of all supply is from CIL, if the CIL provides bad coal, the consumer pays more because of the fact that coal constitutes 60 to 70% of the cost of power generation. And therefore, irregular prices, high prices are because Coal India Limited is acting in a very monopolistic anti-market behavior. Now, the implication of the judgment is finally the court has said there is no merit and Competition Commission should have a preview over PSUs. This creates a major precedence under which competitive neutrality will be there between public and private players. And it is good that you and me, who are paying for Coal India, can actually get a better deal, and Coal India should be penalized for acting in the wrong way as it has been doing. Clear? Yes or no? Okay. Perfect. Okay. So this is clear. Look at the question. The Coal India and CCI tussle reveals the core issues with PSUs in India. A very beautiful question. See, introduction, body, conclusion. Introduction is going to be the recent judgment from the Supreme Court says there is no merit to the Coal India argument against CCI. What does it reveal for us? It reveals three things. That PSUs who act like monopolies should not be allowed to operate like monopolies because they operate in inefficiency. Second, the other issue which has come through is about competitive neutrality. That should PSUs have a competitive edge over private players because they are funded by the government? The answer is no. And last but not the least is that the concept of essential commodities nationalization can be questioned. And in a competitive world of 2023, PSUs should be under Competition Commission of India. And therefore, conclusion is that the Supreme Court order should be welcomed because it now creates new precedents for the concept of what we call as competitive neutrality. Clear, everyone? Come on. Well, Munna is telling us that he's working with BSNL and he understands the inefficiency of BSNL because 4G does not work in a lot of areas, 5G is not rolled out, and still they are not pushing it. Perfect, great. Shweta, it is always constituted 1-2 years before because the center takes time to think of its members and everything. Okay. PSU's role, Misbah, used to be important previously before 1991 because all commodities which were essential were produced by government players so that their prices could be controlled and kept down. However, now it is very, very clear that PSUs only control prices, which distorts the market. That's it. Okay. Now, yes, Niharika. Let's talk about the fourth topic, equally interesting, equally important, one of the last major big topics, after two small topics. From American exceptionalism to exceptionism. Now, this topic is quite interesting because it maps the relationship between India and the US. And we've seen India and Russia. We can now see India and the US. Now, very simply, there's a concept called American exceptionalism because America believes that it is exceptional, that its historical experience, its politics, its economy, it's exceptional. Because of its historical experience, it is the best democracy, the most vibrant democracy, the most, what we call as the American dream, the world of opportunity. All is crap, though technically is not true. But yeah, they argue that we are exceptional. Everybody is exceptional if you ask them. So America argues that we are exceptional. Therefore, we will not interact with the world in a fair sense because we are exceptional. You also need to be exceptional to interact with us. This was a very standard concept within American diplomacy, American foreign policy, defense policy for a very long time. And when it came to India, it was equally true that it used to argue that you are not exceptional, we are exceptional. You have to be part of our concept. We have to be part of our story in order to be part of the exceptional American story itself. But over a period of time, from exceptionalism, America has moved toward exceptionism in the sense when it came to India, now America since 1998 has started to make exceptions. Exceptionalism, exceptions, which is making certain concessions. But why? First, let's try to understand how does this shift come through. See, it says that when it comes to Clinton, Bill Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, there has been a shift. The shift is that Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, and Prime Minister Modi, there have been shifts wherein Prime Minister Vajpayee, Prime Minister Manmohan, all have dealt with the presidents in a different way itself. In the sense that Vajpayee government argued with Clinton to get what is called summit level cooperation. Summit level cooperation means is after Pokhran, once we did our nuclear test, India was sanctioned economically, defense wise. We are not part of the NPT, which is called Non Proliferation Treaty, which is related to nuclear power. We are not part, or were not part at that point of time, of the NSG, which is called Nuclear Suppliers Group. India has a lot of thorium. If you know your science and technology, you would know India has a lot of thorium. However, India does not have what is called nuclear grade uranium. So we need to enrich from thorium into uranium, and uranium gives in its enrichment process plutonium, which is quite important for nuclear bombs. Nuclear bombs use uranium or plutonium both. Now, the problem is that if we are not part of the non-proliferation treaty, NPT, or we're not part of the NSG, which is Nuclear Suppliers Group, the problem becomes is that we don't get access to nuclear technology, we don't get access to nuclear material. Now, Vajpayee government wanted to create cooperation so that there could be dialogue between the two nations. Clinton and Vajpayee government, it was about dialogue. Thereafter, when it came to Manmohan Singh, Bush and Obama, he saw in front of him, it was about nuclear cooperation. That India was given via what is called the 123 agreement, for which even he has to face what is called a majority motion, or he had to face a no confidence motion in that regard. The 123 agreement, or the concept of what we call as exemptions in the NPT and the NSG. Manmohan Singh government tried to go for nuclear cooperation so that India could get access to plutonium, access to uranium, access to nuclear technology. And Prime Minister Modi, who has seen Trump and Biden, he has now moved away from nuclear cooperation to defense and military cooperation. This is a gradual transition. There's a gradual concept in which there has been movement away from summit level cooperation to nuclear cooperation to defense and military cooperation. The simple point of the matter is that we have now reached a moment in which the Americans are ready to give us certain military technology also. And this shift shows their shift from American exceptionalism, which is that we are exceptional, we will not give anything to anybody, and to Indian exceptionism, that we will make exceptions for India quite a lot. How has that happened? That has also been mapped in this concept. First exception which was made for India, exceptionalism means I am exceptional, I am different. Exceptionalism means I will give you concessions. Exception, exceptionalism, two different words itself. Exceptionalism means I am perfect, I am different. Exceptionalism means I will make concessions for you. Now, the first exception was made when it came to nuclear, wherein we were given an exception from NPT, we were given an exception from NSG, and we were actually given exception with regards to access to nuclear technology. And second exception has come recently under what is called CATSA sanctions. CATSA is is a concept in America that if a country deals with a nation which is an enemy of America, the sanctions will be there on that country. For example, India is dealing with Russia, so India automatically comes under CATSA sanctions. But Obama actually removed that for us. Trump actually removed that for us, and we've taken S-400, but that has actually not led to India getting sanctions. Turkey got it, and even the Chinese got it as soon as they dealt with Russia. And the third exception which they've made for us is the concept of oil and natural gas. We are taking a lot of oil and natural gas from Russia. Though the Americans have put in a lot of sanctions on the Europeans, India has not got a sanction in that regard. I'll give you the CATSA full form. Don't worry about that. Now, the simple point of the matter is exceptions are there. But the question is, why? The Americans would not give you 1 degree of their fever. Why are they doing exceptions for India? And there are four very basic reasons which are there. First is India is and still remains the vibrant and the biggest democracy in the world. So India has a very simple story of non-proliferation. We have not shared our nuclear technology with anyone else. We have a very good track record with regards to how we've dealt with nuclear technology. Second is the way the Americans want to balance China, and that is where the things come in. China is a very important counterbalancing moment for US. In order to counterbalance China, India is become a very important partner of the US, and India is being pushed by US quite a lot in a way that China should be counterbalanced in the Indo-Pacific itself. Third is that India is a very big market, wherein India is the most biggest market for generally goods, but also a military market. And last but not the least is Indian diasporic population. Wherein Indian diasporic population, people who have migrated out of India to the US, they've been very, very kind, they've been very, very silent, in a sense, very peaceful, and they've emerged as a very important constituency in America itself. So therefore, the Americans trust Indians in that regard. But can we trust the Americans after all this exceptionism? And this is the last point I'll make, and thereafter we'll move into the integrity. And the answer to that question is what? Should we trust the Americans? And the answer is no. Because America has this moody tendency. Today they will say, you are my brother. Tomorrow they will say, who are you? Standard policy they have. China, they did it with China, they did it with Turkey, they did it with Hungary, they did it with other European countries. It is all just to counter China. But India should also be opportunistic. As much technology we can get from America, we should get it, because the Americans can change their stance at any moment of time, because it is a unilateral transfer. India is getting a lot of things, but India is not giving a lot of things to America. Therefore, if the Americans stop, it can lead to problematic aspects also. And if you've done world history with me, as you know, there are no permanent enemies and allies in world history. Therefore, when it comes to diplomacy, you should not trust anybody generally. America has done this to Pakistan also. True. When it came to Pakistan, F-16s, who gave them? US gave them. All the artillery, which is the Pakistani artillery, is all American. But now, after Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan itself, the American approach has changed. That's a separate issue altogether. So, you understand the basic nitty gritty, then we'll go into the details. Yes? Okay, perfect. Let's talk about the relationship between the five American presidents: Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, along with Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And they have shaped the basic relationship between these two countries. Now, in the Clinton Vajpayee era, it was about summit level diplomacy. In the Manmohan Bush and Obama era, it was about nuclear diplomacy. And under Prime Minister Modi, Obama, Trump, and Biden, it is more about trade, military, and technology transfer in that regard. Now, the first exception was made in 1998 when the US imposed sanctions were removed by Clinton in order to give access to certain arms import. But this was done for both India and Pakistan. But there has been thereafter a shift in which not all exceptions have been transferred to Pakistan. It has become more India centric. Thereafter, the Bush administration played a very important role with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, wherein in 2005 we got a waiver with NPT, and for NSG in 2008 we were able to get access to nuclear, what we call as fission material, and nuclear technology. Thereafter, Obama did another major moment of exception when he exempted India from the US Export Administration regulations and the International Traffic in Arms regulation, so as to make India a major partner of defense technology. The NPT plus arms in itself played a very important role in shaping that relationship and that exceptionism vis-a-vis that era itself. But not all these exceptions were given to Pakistan, they were India specific, and that was a very important moment in this relationship generally. Now, the exceptions have moved beyond that also, because US wavered away or removed the CATSA, which is Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act of 2017. India was removed from it. It should have got it under S-400 transfer from Russia. We still have a lot of defense cooperation with Russia. We should have come under CATSA, but that did not happen. This was a next major exemption which was given to us. Thereafter, once Russia-Ukraine war started, we are still taking natural gas and oil, and a lot of different European countries, specifically Germany, saw a lot of sanctions from the Biden government, but we have not been given sanctions, and therefore the US has moved away from the American exceptionalism of concept to accept exemptions for India itself. Now, the million-dollar question is, why would they do it? First, pluralistic democracy, a very, very prolific democracy, a very what we call as vibrant democracy. Second, economic market and military buyer. Third is more important, countering China in Indo-Pacific. And fourth is a important India-American diasporic population, which has been law-abiding, professional, prosperous, and unproblematic for the Americans, so they trust the Indians. But does this mean that we should always remain in this illusion that it will remain like this? No. America is fickle. America is finicky. It has done it with Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and even China. And therefore, we need to get as much as possible, as more quickly as possible, because as it is, all of this transfer is unilateral because the US is giving us what it wants to give us as per the time it has decided, not according to what India needs. And therefore, this exceptionism can also end very quickly, but we have to make sure that we use it for our advantage in the long run. And that is the type of question which you can expect from this area, which is the India-US relationship has moved from exceptionalism to a more pragmatic era of exceptionism. Do you agree? So again, introduction, body, conclusion. You just write about the recent, for example, transfer of the GE and Hull cooperation between the engine technology being transferred from US to India itself. Body, to talk about how initially it was about America being superior, but exceptions have been made. Talk about the exceptions with regard to nuclear, CATSA, and the concept of, very simply, how we've been given exceptions even in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and conclude by saying it is a unilateral transfer. India should use this relationship more quickly than America using India. Simple. Clear, everybody? Yes. Okay. Now, two simple topics, straightforward topics, not very complicated, which is, this is out of Kurukshetra, Year of International Water Commitments. Now, water has become a major issue in India recently. We have spells in which we have drought, and now we're in the spell of floods everywhere. Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, in Haryana, Punjab, and Delhi. As of right now, we know that Delhi, half of northern Delhi has been flooded because of Yamuna going above its danger line. Punjab, Haryana, Chandigarh were already in a lot of problems. Haryana breathed quite a lot under it. The images out of Kulu, Manali in Uttarakhand and in Himachal Pradesh have been quite devastating. 140 major bridges have been actually destroyed. Major landslides. It's a lot of destruction. Record flooding in flash floods in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, one of the worst in their history. So water is a problem. And what this Kurukshetra article talks about is that all the reports are also saying it, but certain cooperation is important on certain levels because water needs to be resolved before the water issue becomes a major conflict amongst countries. So, under the concept of climate change, under natural resources, law, land and water pollution, water is and water management is becoming important. And in that sense, the most important sustainable development goal which needs to be achieved is water. Now, 2023 is a very important year for international water commitments because in 2017, the UN, the UN very simply said that between 2018 to 2028, it is the International Decade of Action on Water for Sustainable Development. So 2023 becomes the midpoint of this whole transition. Now, the IPCC report in 2021 pointed out that water cycle is very sensitive to climate change. And we've already seen that. With climate change, droughts, floods, and cyclones are becoming more and more common. Extreme weather events are increasing, and close to 40% of the global population as of today is impacted by the fact that water cycle, if touched, can become problematic. And close to 5 lakh crore rupees India loses because of these extreme weather events which happens with water. So water is extremely sensitive to climate change, and I actually don't need to tell you what we are facing today itself shows that water is has been in both extremes problematic, from drought to floods, and a lot of people have been affected by it, and a lot of issues will emerge on the in the long run. Now, the Council for Energy, Environment and Water has pointed out that 75% of Indian districts are actually impacted by extreme events generally. 80% of the population lives in the vulnerable zone of droughts, floods, and cyclones. And in that sense, at one level, water scarcity is an issue, at one level, water quality is an issue, and at one level, infrastructural damage and the cost of these extreme weather events is also impacting India. Further, 53% of all districts, don't have to learn this, I'm trying to create a context. 53% of districts in rural India, out of which 37% are quite vulnerable to these hydrological disasters. And agriculture, which is 80% of all the demand for water, will also be impacted. And water, sanitation, and hygiene will also be impacted if water is not actually managed well. So, very simply, water is a very important resource and is very sensitive to global warming. Now, what are the international commitments and international bodies which have come together to basically make sure that water commitments are met? This is where your interest should become more important. First is the G20. Under the G20, India made sure that there was a very specific summit for environment and climate sustainability working group, and it met under the Ministry of Jal Shakti, and it argued about how Jal Jeevan Mission and Swachh Bharat Mission have worked to make sure that water commitments are met. But the outcomes of this dialogue are very important. First, it has said we will work for universal and safe drinking water standard, groundwater management standard, climate resilient water infrastructure standard things. All this is on paper. Will it happen? Separate issue altogether. But these are the commitments which have been talked about. Further, the United Nations Water Conference happened in March of 2023 in Tajikistan and the Netherlands. And very simply, in the New York, it was co-hosted by Tajikistan and New York and Netherlands. And it has argued that we will work to document on voluntary and non-binding commitment to accelerate progress, this and that. The simple point is they want to make sure that the commitments which were made in the COP or in the different platforms, they are met as soon as possible so that the commitments don't lead to more vulnerabilities. And further, India under this agenda has argued that it will contribute 50 billion US dollars for safe and adequate drinking water. Why am I doing this? Because Kurukshetra is always very descriptive. I'll tell you what to do with this information. Just bear with this. Last but not the least is the UNFCCC itself, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It argued in what is called Water Action Track, was launched in 2019 to check how the Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is water, is met. And it also had a water pavilion in order to attract awareness, and has talked about water and sanitation. Now, thank you for bearing with this. What do you do with this information? Kurukshetra is always like this. Try to understand three very basic things. I hope till this point everybody is alive with me. Yes. Now, very simply, the concept is threefold. Water is, first takeaway is water is sensitive to climate change. This is the first thing which you need to understand. Second, India has a major vulnerability with regards to it. And the third thing which you need to understand is G20, United Nations Water Convention, and the UNFCCC all are working to make sure that the SDG 6 is actually met. What are the basic things here? Drinking water, sanitation, hygiene, agriculture, and making sure that the infrastructure damage from extreme climate events are the least possible. Now, whatever question you can expect is like this. India needs to synergize and leverage its existing water management program and commitments. Comment. Very open-ended question in GS paper 2 or 3, either you can get. Now, what do we do with this type of question? Intro, body, conclusion. In the introduction, you talk about India's vulnerability, that India is vulnerable to climate change. 53% or close to half of our villages are under vulnerability. India has seen flooding, droughts, both type of extreme weather events. So why is there a need to synergize and leverage water management? Because extreme weather events are going to impact India, and therefore how do you synergize and leverage? Cooperation with G20, UNFCCC commitments, WASH. This is sanitation, water management, and hygiene needs to be managed. The agricultural water management should be better. And now use your synergize means to give more energy, to give more power to it. Energize, synergize. Now, the last part of the body in the conclusion will argue that there are bodies which are doing it. India needs to be more committed to it, and with more commitment, we should be able to manage it. We already know that it's all on paper. As we say, bolne ki baat hai. The point is, will it happen or not is a separate issue altogether. But I hope that you understand Kurukshetra topics are like this only. That a lot of information is given there. You just have to understand the basic point. Water management, the concept of water policy, commitments need to be taken seriously. Clear? Don't have to die over it. Understand the basic point here. Yes? You can talk about the UN Water Conservation and Council also. Why not? Sure. Last but not the least, Gandhian thought. Yojana had a lot of useless topics this time. This was the only one which can be asked in a essay type format. And that is why I'm actually asking you or telling you to just bear with me this con. You have no other relevance to this. No other relevance to this by just understanding what is concept of non-possession in Gandhian thought. This is this can be used in an essay paper, and Yojana was more or less you can if you want skip this edition other than this topic itself. Now, when Gandhi was in the Yadarwa jail, he wrote a lot of letters to his ashrams. And in that, he talked about what are called the 11 vows. Vows means 11 promises which the satyagrahis need to make. Now, the concept is quite simple and straightforward, which is that these vows are not for the weak, is for the strong. If practiced, it can lead to satyagrah and swaraj. But what does it argue? Truth. Gandhi's truth. Ahimsa, chastity, brahmacharya. Control palate means what you eat. Non-stealing, don't steal. Non-possession, say that everything is not mine. Fearlessness, to fight the British. Remove untouchability, Harijan campaign itself. Bread labor, meaning you have to work to earn your money. Tolerance and Swadeshi. Now, obviously, you have no real relevance to this as of right now. As of right now. But you have to make it relevant for you in the sense in an essay type question non-possession is something which can be talked about, or you can use this as saying that Gandhi talked about a certain form of renunciation, which is to give up non-possession. But for him this means that he wanted the Indians to give up on Western notions and Western concepts and become more Swadeshi in that sense. So if you look at the basic rules he made for the ashram, you will realize that he was trying to promote Indian interest and Indian culture. He said all ashramites should attend the morning prayers. They should go and eat in community kitchen, basically to remove caste barriers. They should spin as much as possible, specifically 160 threads, which is Swadeshi Khadi. Thereafter, no servants for housework, so that the concept of subordination goes away. The concept of night vigilance, which is that all men should make sure that we don't need the British to control our specific security itself. Young men should clean toilets. This is basically a Harijan campaign itself. All persons should work for at least 8 hours. This was the concept of bread labor. Work for your bread. And thereafter, daily diary and note what you do. What I mean to say is that this is generally not relevant to you. But what type of question can come is something like this, which is that, do you think Gandhian thought of non-possession is relevant for today's world? And very simply, what you can do is that you can talk about live and let others live. You can talk about goodness in all these things, which is that you have to be truthful, you have to be non-violent, you have to control your palate so we cannot eat too much. It should be good for you. Very simply, use these concepts and show modern uses of that. Truth should be there, but technically, truth is not there. Non-violence should be there, but till a point. Thereafter, fearlessness against foreign domination. Non-possession means that you don't argue that everything is yours. Basically, it creates a certain kind of what we call as Gandhian thought and Gandhian notion of arguing that greed should not be there. So, very simply, this topic, the last topic which we discussed today, was generally to give you certain what we call as bread and butter for essay paper. What you do with this is totally your call. With this, I end the session. We've discussed six important topics. I'll repeat them with you and then you can leave. We first discussed the concept of how the Wagner Group has created problems for Putin. The PMC Wagner, which is the private military company, was used by Putin to go into Ukraine, has rebelled after a lot of corruption. Second, we discussed the concept of exceptionalism to exceptionism, which is America thinking it is the best to giving exceptions to India. Thereafter, the Finance Commission, issues of revenue deficit grant, the concept of population, and cess and surcharge. We also thereafter discussed the tussle between CIL and CCI, which is the issue of monopolies and PSUs, creates a lot of precedents for us. Thereafter, we tried to discuss the relationship between the different aspects of water and how does it interact with the commitments of India. Last but not the least is Gandhian thought itself. Non-possession can be used in the essay paper generally. Clear? Okay. So thank you so much. I will see you maybe next month with classes or with webinars. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope all of this made sense. Just go through the PPT once. It should be totally clear. It's a Thursday webinar. Remember, no theoretical knowledge was important. That is, I've gone more into the nitty-gritty of the concept itself rather than the facts itself. So thank you. Take care and bye bye.